Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. We are reading Plato's Phaedo. I hope you're having fun. Of course, as I say pretty much every week, every day, however often I post these, we are on the quest to discover the quest of man, the quest of the philosopher, understanding what philosophy is, how do we do it, why we should care, why it's so important to us, why it is our birthright, why it is the golden gift left to us by not only Socrates, who is sharing a way in through his personal logos that we're reading in the Phaedo, but a gift sent by the gods. The gift of Hermes, Apollo, and Aphrodite we've been seeing that allows us a way to reach our highest goals. And one of the fascinating things about the universe we find ourselves in is everything has its shadow. And the Logos has its shadow, allowing us to not only use philosophy to reach our highest goals, but to solve our problems. And in philosophy, we say that is the process of escaping our fate, which is the logos and dialectic applied to our problems the same way as we are applying it to our highest goals to reach our destiny. Destiny and fate going together. And there's a noisy dog outside. I don't normally have dogs where I live, so that's a little puzzling why there is such a noisy dog outside my window. So last time we left off with a question. What is the significance of Socrates saying that the biggest problem that we face as humans in our quest to do those things, which in the text he is calling purifying and perfecting, is pleasure. Specifically, not just pleasure, the extremes of pleasure and pain, specifically because we take that to be what's most real. Why is that the most dangerous problem for human beings? That was the question we were on last time. So let's jump back into the text and keep reading and see if we can see something more, can shed more light on that problem and the other puzzles that we are developing as we go in this quest together. And thank you for joining me on this quest, by the way. Best game in town. See the text? Let's jump back a little bit. You can tell we've read it before because there is some highlighting. So we are about here. Let's jump back and read the last section. So, Socrates has been talking about how the philosopher does not live in service of the body, but cares for their soul. We are caring for our soul. And we do not welcome even the talking or walking according to the ways of those who live in service of the body. Isn't that interesting? The way we walk, talking we can make sense of, because we talk according to the logos and the dialectic which we are learning and learning more and more the significance of. But what does he mean by also the way we walk? That's a curious thing. So we lead in the opposite direction to where they're going, and with this logos and shadow, the dialectic and shadow idea we have been developing and leveling up together, we can recognize something here. Leading in the opposite direction. We can recognize the two kinds of directions humans can walk. And this is something I really love about philosophy, by the way. It makes things so gosh darn simple. It's so simple in a world that is normally tries to confuse us with complexity. Famously, the economic system tries to confuse us with buzzwords and how complicated it is and graphs and things, and you wouldn't understand it, so don't worry, as a way of keeping people in ignorance while we are scammed by the capitalist system, the banking system, billionaires and multi-billionaires who take everything for themselves and enslave the rest of us. This complexity is a way of gatekeeping. It doesn't have to be complicated. Economics isn't complicated. It's made complicated as a way of obfuscating. Is that the word? Obfuscating? I like that word. I don't know how to say it right. Pulling a veil over our eyes, and philosophy is lifting the veil. Lots of things are like that, purposely complicated as a way of gatekeeping. We talk about the people who represent them as philosophers, but might be the opposite, and how one of the ways that philosophy is gate kept from the rest of us is in that kind of a way. Look at all these big words. Have you read this book? Have you read these 500,000 books written by dozens of different old dead white people, usually? If not, I can ignore what you have to say. You are not a true philosopher. Do you know this movement? Do you know that movement? Do you know this movement or this? No. It's a way of obfuscating. I gotta stop saying that word because I'm not saying it right. It's a way of gatekeeping, making things complicated so people can't share in it. Of course, competition in capitalism, the less people in the industry, the more I can make my money, and everyone's got to pay their rent, and so on and so on. It's just, the problems are systemic. But real philosophy makes things simple, is for everyone. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry can be a philosopher, and every Tom, Dick, and Harry should. And the more fun we have in it, the more we share philosophy, the more we can ungatekeep. We can open those gates, let others in to play the game. It is the human game. It is our birthright. We all benefit from people removing the ignorance, the kinds of sayings that allow for ignorance. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Of course, if our opinions can be fundamentally dangerous or harmful or wrong, we can really translate that saying, everyone's entitled to their own ignorance, and we can look at the cause or the principle behind that, which is, because nothing bad ever happens when people believe things that are fundamentally wrong. There's no danger in people having ignorance, so we should allow it, which is, of course, dangerous itself. That is itself an ignorant and dangerous false belief that, if acted on, and as people do act on, obviously, their ideas about what's good and what's true, people who act on that one can cause a lot of harmful effects. As all wars started by people acting on their ignorance. All genocides, all holy wars, all conflict. Because humans are motivated by their beliefs and their ideas, and we want to engage in the process of purifying those which are false and harmful, and perfecting ourselves to know what's true. What's the truth about what's good? What's the truth about what's just? Hey, if we all are acting on it anyway, why not nail down the truth? And if it's the truth, everyone can share in it. You don't have to be selected by God, born in the right piece of dirt. Everybody can. Anybody who has a mind, language, and can reflect on themselves. Good news for us. So, and on this quest, we can recognize, hey, this opposite direction, those that live in service of their body, philosomatos, they walk and talk a certain way. We want to go in the other direction. We want to walk and talk ourselves in the other direction. To philosophy, to accomplish that deliverance and perfection. And we saw it was these two words means I should have taken a note. Actually, yeah, it was a separation from that. So we see deliverance by a translator, course, as every work, we can look at the original Greek and say, okay, what does the word say itself? He's highlighted it for us, and we can jump into, we can go up to space. With this button here. Yes, here we go. And bring up this guy. And we have this wonderful process called the internet, which is why we have to go up into space on the screen, which allows us to nail down ekines. We can know how to say it if we want to learn Greek. And sometimes that takes a while for some reason. Maybe it's because I'm streaming. Okay, Wikipedia helps us, Wiktionary. The feminine singular form of this guy, which means a place mentioned, the place previously mentioned. Okay, so it's a comparison word that says there. So the word that we're after is the other one. And next time I will make a note, copy that, paste it here. This translates it from the symbols into Greek. Copy that there. Ekines lise. Easy. Lisi. Oh, here's Ekines. That person, that thing, the thing that has gone before, that in time and place or thought. Okay, so that's Ekines. And what are we doing to that place? We are loosening, releasing, ransoming, deliverance from death. There we go. So deliverance from death, loosening, parting, evacuating, divorcing. Interesting. So loosening and releasing, we'll take those two, we'll copy that. We'll jump into the text. Notice we're doing work. We have to apply ourselves. So we will add a note. How do I add a note? It says remove note. I want to add a note. Oh, okay, let's add note. Oh, maybe we had a note. Control paste. Nope. Okay. Loosening, releasing, and delivering, of course, fits, but only within the context of these other words. Letting the host loose from port or home. Deliverance from death. Parting. Let's go parting is another word. So notice when I'm doing this, I am using the words that are there. Parting. And the other word is from that place. So that's a lot of fun. And this is something we do when we read. We read the text as it is, which helps to have different translations, and it really helps to have the Balboa translation because he includes the Greek. And as I was saying, as we do with any text, we can compare what's there, the logos, what's there, with the translator, because we are human beings. We are none of us perfect. In this human form, we are, according to what we've been reading, we are becoming more daemon-like because it's likeness, and becoming more pure because it's lawful for the pure to be with that which is pure. We are going through a purification, which is the word here, in order to loosen or release or part from that place. What place? So the body, so it refers to what we were saying. But that means that our self-logos will have influences from our culture, our background, our upbringing, our religious beliefs, and our family pathologos. Like anything. We were talking about this last time. There are 2 questions you can ask of anything, of any piece of art. Where you at? Where you stuck? We added in a third to make a nice triad. Oh, and what have your dreams been like? Because dreams can illuminate the essence of both. So with our translator here, with Juan Balboa, we can ask, oh, where is he at? And where is he stuck? Why did he pick deliverance? Is there a significance in his religious tradition, which I think is Christianity? Deliver us from evil? Maybe that's why he picked deliverance. Maybe his culture, his background. But when a text hangs on a keyword, it's important for us to nail down what's most accurate and true. While asking that question, where you at, where you're stuck. So maybe we have seen some other sections before that may have had a Christian influence in Balboa's translation. Righteousness, maybe, instead of the actual Greek, which is justice. Conversion, which is a Christian thing instead of reversion. And deliverance instead of loosening or departing from the body. It's just a hypothesis, by the way. We don't know, but it's a good thing to keep in mind as a hypothesis as we read, because we want to have it most accurate for ourselves. And of course, we have to recognize that we are human beings. All of us wouldn't be here unless we did have to go through this purification and perfection. So it's not a blame game or a slight. In fact, this kind of understanding allows us to be more kind to ourselves in our learning. We're not being blind to what's there in order to be polite and then harming our development. But equally so, we're not, by seeing what's there with our friends, and if this translator is in the game, then we could call him one of our friends. We would therefore be able to use the dialectic in a beneficial way based on where he is. The 2 questions, where you at, where you're stuck. So it's not wrong to see the truth. It's actually very important and beneficial. You wouldn't go to a doctor who has an art. As we are developing an art of philosophy, you wouldn't go to a doctor who has an art of medicine and pretend that you are healthy to be polite when you have an illness. So, on that note, we have to walk in the opposite direction, walk and talk to the opposite direction of the philosogitomatoes, the philosomatos, the pretenders to the throne, so that we can accomplish our separation from the body and purification of the soul, following wherever philosophy leads. Now, this is important because we are on a quest to learn the logos, discover the logos, but not only, balloons, to see it, but to learn it, but to see it and apply it to our own world. Where do we see key terms coming up in our life, in our apparently random interactions with people, especially when we're pursuing our highest goals, when we're taking risks, when we're going for that which makes us uncomfortable because it's not familiar, but it's moving us towards where we most want to go. In those situations, how does the logos reflect back to help us? It might not help you literally, directly or immediately, but it might give you information and puzzles in your experiences that you can carry with you to wonder about the logos and later on gain insights when you reflect. The great Pierre Grimes would always say, the late great Pierre Grimes would always say, experience is dead. It's in our reflection on our experiences that we can gain benefit. So when we do that, were there any key terms in this weird interaction that I had? Oh, no, thumbs up. Thumbs up. Was there any weird coincidences or symmetries through time? Coincidences or serendipitous things? Did I see what I've been reading in the Phaedo with this group in this channel? Have I seen any of that reflected in my real life experiences? So this is discovering the Logos, and then when we apply it to our meaningful goals and follow the Logos that we're learning, then we have upgraded ourselves, this noise, from discovering the Logos, seeing the Logos, to following the Logos, which is what we do, which is the game of philosophy, following the Logos, wherever philosophy leads. Right, I mentioned Pierre Grimes, Dr. Pierre Grimes. A lot of people who are watching these videos and join me in the chat are aware of Dr. Grimes. Some of them came into philosophy through Dr. Grimes. He passed away 6 days ago. I haven't talked much about it yet. I have studied with him for about 20 years. He is a significant figure in my life. I might say something about it later. I don't know. I might do a whole episode of this podcast about Pierre Grimes. I'm still sort of processing a lot. And he was a Socratic figure. He lived the way that we're learning here. He personified himself. He was very much a Gandalf figure who has reached the end and has turned around to come back and help the rest of us on our journey. But if you've known the person yourself, or if you've watched the his lectures, he has a great PRS series. If you want to check him out on YouTube, from the mid-90s, he did a series called the PRS. If you Google that or you YouTube search that, they are fantastic. If you've experienced those, you realize, man, this guy's operating on many different levels at once. And if you go back to the same videos, you'll recognize, oh, there is so much more depth here, but I had to have leveled up myself to be able to see what was there the whole time. Sometimes it feels like you might recognize that it feels like he's talking to you directly. And that, of course, is one of the aspects of the Logos. It's caring for you personally and can act through people like Pierre. And for that reason, for his profundity, it would be difficult to talk about him because of how profound he was, because of how everything seemed to operate on many different levels in a wonderful, curious, fascinating, and beneficial way. So I don't really know what to say about it now, but because of how fantastic a figure he was, and how literally, as Socrates mentioned in the Apology, a gift to mankind, so too was Dr. Grimes, in many different ways. And yeah, maybe I'll sprinkle in bits and pieces for the rest of this channel, rest of this reading series, rather than dedicate a whole episode to him. But it is worth mentioning that he has passed on. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about the week or 2 weeks or the several weeks leading up to his death. I am a little bit disappointed that I wasn't able to connect as much as I would have liked to have in those final weeks, or being kept in the loop. But there's nothing I can do about that now. However, we have a text from somebody just like Dr. Grimes, Socrates, who is able to share his logos in his last moments, and we can access it. And there's no gatekeeping here, as we've been talking about gatekeeping today. We can all share in it. And that's something that I have been trying to be better at myself, which is the main reason that I have this series. I've seen how much I've benefited personally from philosophy, and not by learning philosophy, I've seen the reasons why that's the case. The necessary and beautiful reasons why philosophy has benefited me, and necessarily is that which benefits all people. So I'm doing my best to figure out ways of sharing it so that we can all benefit from it. Because it's not it's different from a lot of other traditions which offer advice or anecdotal experience. This is what happened for me, this is what worked for me, or this is what might work for you. Projection. People often project what they want from for themselves when they give advice or life coaching to others. The same thing within spiritual traditions. The two questions: where you're at, where you're stuck. The level of where they're at, their vision and understanding will dictate the kind of benefit they can provide, but also the level of where they're stuck. Their problems will influence how well they can communicate their vision, and whether or not their vision is accurate. As we're seeing, looking at certain words in the text, that's why applying the dialectic to our shadow and purifying ourselves from our problems, what we call philosophical midwifery, is so important. But philosophy is different. It's not about opinions. It's not about advice. It's not about packaging your own personal anecdotal experiences, prejudices, beliefs, and even where you're at and where you're stuck into a system of life coaching or anything like that. As you know, a lot of traditions are, a lot of spiritual traditions, a lot of psychotherapy. That's the principle. It's eclectic, which means an individual pick from here and here and here, pick the ideas, the big terms, the academic terminology to support their own personal perspectives. Philosophy is different. Philosophy is the opposite of that, or that is the shadow of philosophy, we could say. It's objective, it's universal, it's always true, and we can understand why it helps, why the logos necessarily helps, because we are learning about the nature of the logos, its emanation through the levels, and how we can climb that ladder back up. And why, which is why the title of Dr. Pierre Grimes's book, what we call jokingly the Orange Sutra, actually not jokingly, people take it very serious when they use that term. Orange because it's got an orange cover, and sutra because it's a yoga. It is a method of spirituality, but it's also the subtitle of that book, which I recommend. And there's been a new release in print, so it's more accessible. The subtitle is A New Paradigm. Should have been called The New Paradigm for Understanding Human Problems. So as that book illustrates, it's the paradigm. It's not one of many. And of course, this transition from A's to thus, from adjectives to substances or nouns, from the many to the one, is the quest that we've been seeing all the way through this channel and all the way through our reading. How can we go from the many particulars of our senses to that which is universal and objective and true and eternal and immortal, and all of these other things that we have been, adjectives we've been picking up, that we hopefully have been taking notes of and adding to our document so we can build into a dialectic. Words like, what have we got here? Uniform, indissoluble, always abiding according to the same, deathless, intelligible. Pure comes up a lot. Pure, eternal, deathless. So this section from 79 onwards, there's a lot of great adjectives there that you can pull out, add to your notes, and then add to your dialectic on the soul, on philosophy, and on the logos. So because it's eternal, deathless, pure, most akin to self, allows us to cease from our wandering, leads us to that state of self called phronesis, uniform, indissoluble, always abiding. Because of these things, the logos and philosophy is that which is beneficial, the method of helping, the actual science of psychotherapy, the actual complete system of spirituality, the actual ideal of understanding, and therefore should be taught in every spiritual house, hut, ashram, should be taught at every school from day one. Should be the system that every justice system, every courtroom, every law house should be based on. Every single day at every parliament meeting, any government should start with reading the Phaedo, should start with a reflection on our dreams, pointing to where we're at and where we're stuck. So not only from my personal benefit, but because it is universal, because philosophy allows us to not just stay with the anecdote or the personal, but to ascend to the level of principles. For that reason, I recognize that, this is the thing that helps human beings. And therefore, to be beneficial, to be a good human being, to act beneficially, to be more daemon-like for my own benefit of my soul in this life and the next, but also for the benefit of all human souls. And apparently we might actually be the same soul if what we were reading about the hyparxis of the soul, all a single soul, just like the ideas all have a single hyparxis idea called self-usia, then it's not really to help me or help others, it's just to help because we're the same soul. So this anti-gatekeeping for the interest of benefit is one of the reasons why one of the main reasons why I'm in this channel and doing this. And here we're reading that gone a bit too far, that we walk and talk in this way so that we can accomplish that separation from the body, purification, and following the logos wherever philosophy leads. Welcome in the chat. You ordered a copy of the Orange Sutra. Good for you. You had a platonic dream. You were in a cave, like the cave exploring. Interesting. I encourage you to apply where you're at on the understanding of the logos and the dialectic, and experiment with applying it to your dreams. Can you pull out key terms? Can you pull out the narrative? Who's the character? What's his goal? So there's a triad there. The goal being the activity and the power. Can you pull out those? Awesome. Yeah, everything that you've been learning about your triads, your skill trees, all of this stuff. Let's bring up the notes. That's the wrong one. That's the Parmenides one. Yeah, look for the puzzle in the dream. Where are you stuck in the dream? Here we go. Yeah, and where can you place where you're stuck in the dream? Was it your planning? Was it your outward moving? Was it your inward desiring? Was there a problem in your activity, your functioning? Was there a problem with your power? Was your a state of being an issue? Like, use what you're learning and where you are in the logos and apply that to your dreams. And this is one of the way the logos comes back and helps and helps us. That is a good point. Maybe we can do a dream series coming up soon. I'll look into that. And do read-alongs with the logos and do some dream exploration too. That is a possibility. I will look into that. So yeah, I'm glad that you are seeing Platonic themes reflected in your dream. All of the stuff we've seen about being a philosopher. The ladder of the logos. Everything we're seeing about the dialectic. The categories of the dialectic, apply those. But also everything we're seeing about, where is our little picture of our man? Where's our dude? Here we go. All of these things. Seek excellence, look for key terms, look for self terms, the Platonic terms in your dream. Look for patterns. Is there a certain theme that repeats? If you have multiple scenes, can you see a pattern in the scene? Does the theme develop? Look for questions. Are there puzzles in your dream? What is the overall puzzle? And again, as we're saying, we could say that all philosophy, as we've been going through, is a kind of movement from the many to the one. Can you find a question that applies to the many? Look for the many different questions. And is there a whole there? But one of the most interesting things to do is to start with that many in one problem in your dreams. Look at it as a one. How do you see the dream starting? Before you've explored it, before you've unpacked it. What's the problem in the dream? What's the message of the dream? And why do you think you're getting this dream right now? Write that down. And then do your exploration. As we were saying, it's not the experience that affects us, it's our reflection upon and understanding of the experience, which we recognize happens through the logos and dialectic. So have that down and then do the work, unpack it, use the logos, practice as we're doing. Ideally, we want to be practicing the dialectic all the time, whether it's reflecting on our problems, reflecting on a text, or on our dream. So our dream gives us another opportunity to keep practicing. And as Socrates has been saying, we want to only look out for the body as much as is necessary, so that we can spend our time doing philosophy and real philosophy in the art and practice of death and dying through the exercise of philosophy, which is the dialectic. So after you've applied the dialectic to, where's my pen? To the, I've got to do that thing. Hang on a second. I have to make it so my pen goes to the right screen. Which I need to open this guy. There we go. Key terms. After you've pulled out the questions, after you've unpacked it with the order, can you see a definition, a demonstration, a division, and analysis? Can you see a problem self to self? Can you see a problem self to others? Can you see how the problem goes others to others? And can you see how the problem affects your goal at the start? Your way of being, your state of mind. So after you apply everything that where you're at in your learning of the logos and dialectic, then make another assessment. What was the message of the dream, the question of the dream, and the reason you had it? And compare where you were at the start, before the process of the logos, self-reflection, the ousia through the logos. Compare that to your understanding at the end. And what you might find something super interesting, that understanding you have at the end about a puzzle or problem, you may be able to see that very thing reflected in the difference between your understanding at the start and at the end. This is one of the fascinating things about the logos. It's self-reflective. It's self-contained. It's all the way down. It spirals all the way down. So if there's a problem in the dream that's relevant to you personally now, that might be the very same kind of problem that causes the difference between how you first saw the dream and how you see the dream after the reflection. That may represent the problem itself. Which is fast, isn't that cool? I think it's cool.
Wow.
And hey, you might have difficulties in applying your dialectic. You might be stuck. Like, how do I apply the dialectic to the dream? That doesn't... I mean, there's too many things to apply. I'm overwhelmed. Or Or, I don't trust my understanding. I can try and do self to self, self to others with the problem or the character or the functioning or the state of mind, but I don't know if I'm going to really understand it. So that self-doubt. So not only might you recognize once you're able to put that doubt or that negative states of mind, those blocks aside, and actually do it anyway, you might recognize at the end of the dream that understanding you got is not only reflected in the dream, reflected in the different scenes of the dream, reflected in how you understood the dream at the start and at the end, but also reflected in the problem you had in doing this very thing. All the way down where you're at, where you're stuck, will be reflected. Isn't that cool, Owen?
Wow.
So, in this way, this is one of the fascinating things about the logos. All the way down, all the way through. Right. Same show, different seasons. The best drama. Right. Right, yeah. I have this great pen and pad that I use. The more I work on the dream from chat, the more clear it becomes and the more details. Yes. Yes, that's fascinating. And the dreams are so rich. Like this text is so rich. The more you could spend a day on it, you could spend a week on it. In fact, if you have a friend who's also in the game, you could try coming back to the same dream like every day for a week, see what happens. And you'll see the levels that it's on. Everything in the dream is there for a reason. Every piece of furniture, every state of mind, every puzzle. As we've been saying about Socrates, dreams are not paid by the word. So that level of sharing in the logos is also where Socrates and Plato is at, and this text is at. So we will see the same kind of themes. We'll see repeating themes, a symmetry of themes. We'll see the functioning of different characters. How does Socrates function towards those characters? And how is that functioning, how is it reflected in his seeing, his speaking, and acting? There's a triad. Make that into a triad. Actually, I'll do it. I'll add it to the list. Another triad. Where's a bunch of triads? Okay, add it to a list. Look for a bunch of triangles somewhere. Where's a bunch of triangles on the board? Here we go. Here's a bunch. So we can say, here's another triad. In the dream, can you see... Color will we make it? Make it this color. In your dream character, do you see how well did you see? How well did you speak about what you saw? How well did you act upon what you saw? Of course, right away we can recognize two sticks you could rub together to better understand that. So in your dream, how are you functioning in this kind of a way? How is Socrates seeing? How is he speaking? How is he acting? But also right away we can see acting. Hang on a second. Acting as the bottom corner of a triad. That reminds me of... We don't have it here. Here we go. Yeah, this one. Acting, being, power, acting, activity. Oh, so maybe I can take this triad, pick it up, lay it on top of the other one, and gain more about this one. Seeing, is that to do with my state of being in any way? Turn this into a question. You might not see it straight away, but it can be a question. Because acting clearly fits on top of activity. So try the other ones. Speaking. What's that? Power. Do you get kind of power by putting into the logos and speaking upon what you see? I'm not sure. So this is how we do in philosophy. When you start to see a pattern, look for the missing terms. We talked about that being called philosophical abductions. Abduction is like deduction is when you know the greater and you can deduce going down. I know this law, therefore I can deduce what must have happened in experience. Induction is like we do in science. We start with the lesser. We start with physical observations in physical science, and we try and induce a theory that's called induction. This is a theory of gravity, which of course might change. We can't know it for certain, which is what makes science different from philosophy. We do have knowing in philosophy. Abduction is where you have a little of one and a little of the other. You recognize there are some connections here, but then you fill out the missing terms, which is what we do here. Philosophical abduction. So you look for patterns, which is like you do in video games, right? You notice, oh, there's a statue. Oh, there's a missing statue here. And each of those statues is tied to a doorway or a gem. Oh, so this one's missing there, and this one's missing there. I can use what I know of the greater to answer this question here, and I can use what I know of the lesser to answer this one here, because I have seen there is a relationship. Last time we talked about having, this is what symmetry does. Symmetry, giving you two examples, is enough to establish a relationship. We talked about how in a limerick, the first two lines follow the same structure. I met a man from Kentucky. And then something else in a bucket. All right, that's the same. And then the third line is different. It's a lot longer. And then we're back to the start. And somebody talked about, I can't remember what, somebody in the chat gave another example of two examples of something to establish a pattern, so you can see the variation in the third. And then after that variation, you come back to the beginning again. How that kind of is like ousia. You start from the place, you have a kind of understanding of the dream, which reflects your patterns in your thinking and seeing. Your seeing, your speaking and acting is reflected in how you understand the dream. And then you do something different. You engage in a self-reflection through the dialectic and logos. And then you go back to the start again, which is a seeing, speaking and acting again. But having gone through that different thing in the middle, you come back to where you were in a new way. Just like in a limerick, you have one line, two line, and the third line is different, but then you're back to the beginning. But hopefully you've gained an insight. And that's what makes a limerick funny, is because you end with a punchline, a new way of seeing what you were looking at originally, having gone through the explanation. So you could say in joke, oh yeah, I think that's what it was. Joke. Somebody said, oh, you have a setup in a joke. You set up a pattern. I went to my girlfriend on a Saturday night and this is what happened. I went to my girlfriend on a Sunday night, that's what happened. But then on a Monday, this weird thing happened. Then next weekend, when I go back to her house, I realized she was actually this way. And then everyone laughs because that established pattern, they're seeing in a new way. And we talked about how this is similar to to a big question in philosophy. If all learning is remembering, then this idea of being, all of the things that we're interested in, justice, beauty, goodness, truth, phronesis as a kind of power, a virtue of the soul, B-E-A-U-T-Y. We talked about how all of these are the many, the A's, but they have a the at the top, at the hyparxis, which we can call self-ousia. That's what we saw in the Phaedo. If all learning is remembering, wherever you start with, you might start to notice, let's look at beauty, many beautiful things. There's the A's, the many, and then you go through this process of reflection. So this is your pattern, establishing a pattern, many examples of beautiful things. You need at least two. See two beautiful people, but that's enough. If you're super efficient, that's enough to ask the question, hang on a second, if there's two, what is the thing itself? What is the beauty itself? Then, after having 2 examples, you do that third thing, which we saw is a reflection on the thing with the self logos enousia that allows you to see it in a new way. There's the 4th thing. Line 1 of the limerick, line 2 of the limerick, this third thing, which is different, allowing you to get to line 4 where you see it in a new way. So we do something called philosophy, maybe the symposium, maybe the Phaedo, and then we can go from the many to the one. What is the beauty itself? Same pattern. And because we're philosophers, we can recognize 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, isn't that the same amount of parts as the dialectic itself? Definition, demonstration. By the way, 1, 2, is a demonstration demonstrating the thing you're defining? So would these 2 be the same? And then we have to divide it up into the arguments that we can look at, all of the different key ideas, the self-logos ideas, or the ways of relating others to others. And what do we do at the end? We take that reflection and we apply it back to the start. There's the 4th line of the limerick. We've seen it in a new way. And then in philosophy, we can recognize, hang on a second, we can do that same thing to justice. Because not only am I interested in beautiful things, I'm interested in justice. I want to live in a fair world. I don't like when an injustice has affected me. I don't want to be unjust towards others. So, same thing. Can you establish 2 instances of injustice? Limerick line 1, limerick line 2. Then that's enough to ask the philosophical question, which is the question, what's philosophy? Moving from to the, from adjectives to nouns. What is justice itself? So hopefully that 3rd section, the division section, divided up. Can you read justice in many different books? In the Phaedo, in pretty much all Plato, there's a reference to justice, I think. Justice is a big part. The Republic, definitely. Learn about what it means to be just. And then finally, can you take all of those many different things and relate it back to the start? How do we do that? How do we take the many examples, 3, and take it back to the start to look at the subject in the new way? The punchline. Well, how do we do that? Is there a way of collecting together all of the key terms, relationships, and ideas of all of the many divided things and collecting them together in a way that allows you to look at the subject in a different way? Go back to the start. Hang on a second. Isn't that the dialectic? Isn't that why we've been taking notes as we read? So that we can take all these terms and put them together in a certain structure for self-reflection? Isn't that exactly the dialectic?
Wow.
And then, hey, after you've done it with beauty and justice, by the way, this is the exercises that Parmenides calls Zeno's dialectic. Zeno's exercises, do it with justice and beauty. That's 2. You can keep going, but 2 is enough to establish a pattern. Hang on a second. If beauty has a movement from particulars to substances, if justice also does that, can we throw our triangle in? Look at all the other triangles we've got already, by the way. Triangles. Philosophy is a lot about triangles. So here, and now we have a new way of understanding our triangles, understanding of our triads. What's that? 2 is enough to establish a pattern, which is the most efficient or the most simple way of going from to the. So a triangle is the most simple way of going from many to the one, or the examples to the hyparxis, the division to the synthesis analysis, the last 2 parts of the dialectic. The most simple way of going from many to one. which is the essence of what we're doing in philosophy. Many souls to the one soul. Many lifetimes to the eternal, immortal existence, graduating from our lifetime. The many beautiful things to beauty itself. The many selves that we saw from our evolution from caveman days. Us versus them. The cause of all division, violence, what's the words in the text? Civil discord, battles, wars are all, well, according to Socrates, not being a philosopher and instead being a lover of the body, not recognizing there is a self-ousia. But also we can recognize from our evolution from cavemen that us versus them was a kind of way of thinking that kept you safe before you developed the logos. A way of solving a problem that allowed certain cave dwellers to evolve to where we are now, but it's a problem that no longer works. It's a solution to a problem that no longer applies. So we can see all division. Palestinians versus Zionists. Christians versus Protestants. Americans versus immigrants. Republicans versus Democrats. Conservatives versus progressives. Christians versus heathens. Muslims versus infidels. It's all the same. Now, if one of those are particular to your culture, family, time period, then they'll stick out like, oh, that one kind of hurts a little bit to hear that. Not personal. By listing a list of many, I've established a pattern to point to the fact it's not just about if you're a Muslim. I don't like you pointing. Muslim versus infidel? Is it us versus them? A solution to a problem necessary from our evolution, but is actually going to limit us from moving up the ladder of the logos if we don't put that behind us through understanding, to see that there is a self that isn't us versus them. So we could have this cave over here, this cave over here. Two caves is enough for us versus them, is enough for problems, but we need that third thing to go from the problems to the solution. What's that third thing? Dialectic. Logos. So we're at this part of the triangle now in humanity. We have enough two things simplified. You say, but there's a lot of divisions. There's Catholics, there's Protestants, there's Republicans and Greens and progressives and Labor and liberal, and yeah, you name it, you can find many, but we can simplify it into the most basic structure of reality in its unfolding and returning, the triad. The one to the many. Two is enough for many. Simplify all of that as us versus them. Our cave versus anything outside the cave. You could even say, you could express this as the spiritual question. How can you have enough for two things in the spiritual game? Well, if spirituality, loosely speaking, ends in that experience of oneness, which we have seen is, in philosophy, we can understand that. In spirituality, they talk about the feeling or the state of mind of oneness, but they lack the logos, pretty much. Like you can see bits of course, they'll have some semblance of logos where they're at, but with the Phaedo and in the game of philosophy, we can recognize that oneness as self-ousia, the oneness of all of these ideas. Well, what's their simplest us versus them? We talk about the people in the physical world, whether it's religion or politics or scammers that prey on us versus them. Hey, buy my product because I think men are better than women. That's an us versus them. Because alphas are better than betas. That's an us versus them. Because whites are better than others. That's an us versus them. They prey on that. They want our desire to climb the ladder, the hierarchical ladder. They give us the shadow, which is what? Us versus them. And they make this appealing because it's easier. You don't have to do anything. They're just telling you you're automatically better. That's why racism is so appealing to so many people. That's why even today, the world is full of racist, nationalistic, fascist leaders controlling the world. Hey, we have the internet now. Surely we've seen that fascism is bad. They're still popular. Why? Because we haven't learnt what is needed to go from the many to the one, which is what? The dialectic. It's so simple. Experiences are dead and causing our death. It's as we talked about the expression from Pierre Grimes. It's the reflection on our experiences that we can benefit from. That's the dialectic and the logos. So we talked about in the political sphere or the physical sphere, defendant versus prosecution, person labeled criminal versus judge, sometimes teacher versus student, or student versus teacher, or my religion versus others outside of my cave, my family way of being and other people who challenge it. So we can say, you can take all of those many differences and unify them as us versus them. In cave, and we can understand the cause of that evolutionarily speaking, and so it's not personal. So if any of these triggered you, take note of it, put it in your book to notice where you're stuck. It's going to be an information about, hey, this triggered me. There might be something I have to look at, because logically the logos is saying it's not personal, because he just gave a list of about 50 different ones. Why does that one stick out to me? The same reason you might pass 50 different people in your day, but the one person who gives you the kind of negative response that triggers you, calls you big ears. Hey, somebody's called you beautiful today. Someone complimented your shirt. Someone said you got beautiful eyes. Someone says your nose is too big. Someone says that you stink. But you ignore all of those, but the one person who called you big ears, that triggered you. That should go into your note to figure out where you're stuck. It's a message. In a similar way, if you're triggered by any of this us versus them, take notice of what it was. Write it down. The same way we did it, talk about dreams. Look for key terms. What was the word that you said? Logos. What was the state of mind? How did you feel? What did you see? What would you want to say to someone who triggered you? How would you have felt? Did you want to bash them up? How are you going to act? Same thing all the way through. So our question now is, okay, if this is the physical world, what about our level of human development to do with the spiritual world? Because there are some people who realize that there are problems and a big mess in the physical world. If they lack the logos, they won't understand it's because of this primary triangle. But what's their goal? What's their us versus them? What's the cause of the problems that in the spiritual game? Well, basically speaking, if there's a oneness, what's the us versus them? Well, instead of us in the cave, spiritual people recognize there is a self. In the physical world, we don't really care about the self. We don't care about the self of workers working for Amazon. We don't care about the self of human beings that breathe the polluted air. No, all we care about is profits. It's shit, but it's kind of the way it is. We don't recognize a self or a soul. That's the realm of spirituality. Talking about soul and economics or politics, that's crazy. It's not, obviously. In effect, if there is a ladder of development, what are the two questions? Where you're at, where you're stuck. There is a certain point in that ladder where you can recognize, there does exist a self or soul. And below, we can recognize that as the dialectic if it doesn't exist. What if the self or the soul doesn't exist? You can have 4 categories here, 4 categories here. That's the dialectic again. See how wonderful a dialectic is? It keeps coming up everywhere. So if you don't think there is a self or soul that exists, if you don't see people as selves or souls that exist, and you're a lawmaker, if you don't speak as though souls exist when you make laws, when you communicate with other economists on how to make laws for the economy or for the state, if you don't act on that, then you are blocked. What are you blocked in? You're blocked in a level of development along the dialectical ladder where the self or the soul does not exist. And we recognize that as our what if universe A, what if universe B. What if Spider-Man became an Avenger, and what if he didn't? What if beauty exists? What if it doesn't? What if justice is? What if justice isn't? What if philosophy exists or relates to the ideas of existence, self-ousia, and what if it doesn't? Philosophia, philosoggy tomatoes, philosomatos. So, most things in our world, we're just behind this ladder. This break in the ladder. Very rarely do politicians consider human beings as selves or souls. They're more interested in power and money and maximizing their own personal. Oh, by the way, Socrates gave us they're lovers of the body. What does that manifest as? Lovers of honor. They want to have the fame and the power. They put power in that. And riches. They want to make themselves the big bucks. In Australia right now, most of our politicians make laws for the international billionaire companies who are just exploiting our resources and our human beings because they don't give a shit about human beings. And then the politicians get a job in that industry. They call it the golden escalator. You play ball, you make laws for these exploiters, these billionaires, and then you'll get a job working for them, and then you'll get the riches. Or you'll get an honor, you'll get a seat on the board. Some other countries call it the golden, not escalator, what's that revolving thing you walk into in some hotels? Interesting. What is that thing? That revolving door thing. Yeah, we're being ruled by our lessers. Good point. Can't remember what that thing's called. But that's what they call it. The golden revolving door. Yeah, maybe it's just called revolving door. You become a politician, you make laws for the oil company, then you get a job in the oil company, and then you become a senator, and then you become CEO of the company, and so on and so on. So that's the how the problems manifest or demonstrate itself in the physical world, in all of our institutions. But that's okay. We can recognize, oh, that's just because we're just here. But there are some groups that aren't interested in that physical world. They're interested in oneness. They're interested in spirituality. We call them spiritual traditions: Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and so on. What's their fundamental two things enough to establish a pattern of manyness, and would be where you start the problem that you have to return to the one: self and other. Yeah, revolving door. Thank you. Fundamentally, we feel like if you've been meditating for a long time, you can recognize the most fundamental thing that you feel is there is a you, and then there is other. If I pinch your arm, I'm not going to squeal because it's not me. It's fundamentally other than me. I can't drive your car home because it's not my car. There's a difference between self and other. But in spirituality, you could say the primary triad or the primary triangle of us versus them, in cave good, outside cave bad, is self and other. Because they want to get to a feeling of oneness where it's all one. And whatever level of logos that they have within their tradition, they can talk about it. It's all one consciousness. It's all one mind. It's all the divine. We are all God experiencing ourselves subjectively. It is all Maya, maybe, if you want to take that oneness and say it doesn't actually exist, but there is a kind of oneness. It's all illusion. Depending on your tradition, you will have your own personal logos. And in philosophy, because it's not about a subjective logos, it's a universal logos, we could recognize the way they understand this experience of oneness will tell us where they are at that ladder, but above this line. Yeah, they think that the soul or oneness or the self or the divine exists, but how do they think it exists? Is it consciousness? Is it illusion? Is it providence? Is it mind? Is it God? And what kind of God do you think it is? Is it a creating God? Is it a God with qualities? So whatever it is, because we are learning the objective logos, we'll be able to recognize where they are at and the shadow, where they're stuck. So we're recognizing 2 is enough to establish a pattern. 3 gives you something new, which allows you to return home. And we've seen that applies to everything in the physical world and the spiritual realm. And just making some space, deleting all of our work here. Maybe I shouldn't delete it. Or maybe I should just make Nita notes so we can keep it on the board. Or maybe we'll write it out later. Because it might be handy to go back to. So we talked about, let's keep that last bit. So we talked about we do a triangle on beauty. Many beautiful things. 2 beautiful things is enough for you to then. So what's our first category of the dialectic? A definition of beauty. Demonstration. There's 2 there. Oh, the first beautiful thing. That's enough to give a definition. Oh, here's another person. Oh, there's another demonstration of it. Now I have to go through a third thing we call division, dividing it up according to the logos and dialectic. And then we have a fourth thing where we synthesize it together, analyze it, bring it back to the start, and look at that new thing in it, that defined thing in a new way. But it's not defined as an beautiful thing. Now it's defined as the beautiful thing. Now you're at the hyparxis. Now you're in the realm of being. You're a philosopher. You're playing a philosophy game. Philosophy is specifically love of wisdom, which is the logos directed towards being. Being. You have to be above that line. As Parmenides says, you have to first permit the ideas of real beings to be. Here's Parmenides giving Socrates his instructions at the beginning of his life. Permit the ideas of real beings to be, to exist. Keep your mind fixed on your objections, because that will give you information about your shadow, where you're stuck. Define each of the particular ideas. There we go, definition. That's where you apply your dianoia, your understanding. But also allow each of those beings to be of the self. That's the power of the dialectics. Which means what? Well, we recognize, okay, waiting for the quote to disappear. I'll have some coffee. Good quote. Good quote there. It's a nice one. So, allow real being to be. Allow there to be a the. Even if it's just a true belief to start off with. It's where you start. Because we're getting it from Socrates, who's no slouch. There are reasons why we listen to him. There's reasons why we're into philosophy. Okay? Apply the dialectic to them. Explain them. That's the apply the dialectic, which is the movement to the thing. But now that we've done this for beauty and justice, that's enough to have 2 things. Now, what's the thing? What is the being itself? Socrates has been calling this truth. If only I could have a dream with Pierre in it to tell me how it works. How what works? Pierre could be the avatar of the Dream Master. Yeah, he could be. Yeah. He is. I've seen a lot of dreams where Pierre plays that role for people. Why? Because everything is there for a reason in our dream, which means all of the furniture, all of the characters, everything is a metaphor or a simile. Simile to do with simile means what's it like, which is to do with the state of mind. Metaphor is what it is. There's an object. So for you, if Pierre represents a daemon or the voice of the self or the dream master, then your own dream master knows this and may present that as the metaphor for you. Right, yeah. Those are bad dreams are an interesting case as well. Often they're kicking the bum. Like, hey, pay attention. Dreams are important. Or this might be an urgent problem. Often that's a reason why you have scary dreams. So, back to this. 2 to 1, the primary triad. The last thing Parmenides mentioned was we have to permit the ideas of real being to be of the self. So that would mean even when we go from beauty to justice to the truth, the self-ousia, the hyparxis, we have to do one more final step. We have to, therefore, I'm not going to give you what it is, I'm going to set up a puzzle. When you have reached an understanding or true belief or even direct experience of this self-ousia, which we are at in the text, how can we establish enough for 2 using this, take this, the same way we had the beautiful here, then becomes one of the 2 terms with justice to reach the hyparxis, is that can we use that hyparxis, pull that into one of the 2 things, along with another thing, enough to establish a pattern to allow us a kind of question that we can apply the self, logos, and dialectic to reach the hyparxis of self, which is beyond even being. So this would be the implications that follow this. So these are 2 enough to establish a pattern. What kind of a pattern? A pattern of the archetypal triad of 1 and 2 to reach the hyparxis. Meaning, if that is enough to establish a pattern and there is a stage beyond even self-ousia, that would mean we can push the implications, do a 3rd thing, put self-ousia in one of those, find another thing that is like self-ousia to make it 2, so that we can develop a question that we can apply the dialectic and logos to go from the realm of being to the one self. That's a question. I don't know what it would be, but it's what would follow. And also we can see, well, if this is a kind of primary question. Of all the many back to ones, like we said before, okay, one of the puzzles in philosophy, if all learning is remembering, and all of the things we learn about is self-ousia, beauty, justice, goodness, these are all the things we learn about. Even if you're stuck in the physical world, you're still interested in beauty. You're still interested in good things. Everything you do is because you want to eat good food. You want to take your car to a good mechanic. You want to know the truth about how much tax you have to pay because you don't want to go to jail and stuff like that. So whether you're stuck below the line of being or not, we're always interested in this stuff. So, but if it's true that all of these things can go on the bottom of the pyramid or the bottom of the triangle, and they all have a hyparxis and self-ousia, then everything we are learning is a remembering of self-ousia. One question is, well, if we knew it before we were born, allowing us, the dancing men in Phronesis in the chat, allowing us to, we necessarily knew self-ousia before we were born, providing the conditions for this learning, then one question could be, well, why the heck did we forget it? Why are we here? Why did we enter this physical world where, especially at this point of time, where as a culture, we haven't overcome that problem and entered the realm of being. We haven't discovered the logos. So therefore, we will continue to suffer our problems until we can go from us versus them, the inside cave good, outside cave bad, to realize we are all the same self, we are all the same soul, we are all of the same mission, we are all here to do the same thing, purify and perfect ourselves, separate from the body and purify ourselves from our problems, perfect ourselves through that development. At this point of history, we have exactly what we need for problems. We have enough for two. What is the definition of that which solves problems? The dialectic. In our culture, we have what we need to cause problems. We have not yet awakened what we need to solve problems. So why incarnate into this world at this point of history, where we have a lot, not just a lot for problems, we have nuclear weapons. We have enough to cause mass human suffering and the destruction of humanity itself. So if I'm here to learn, why incarnate into this period of history? If I knew everything already, why forget it? That's a big question. Well, we've seen that to go from ours, our beautiful, our just thing, to thus, we're not just content with our physical observations of many beautiful people or many beautiful things. We have to go through philosophy. We have to do the art and practice of philosophy, which is the art and practice of death and dying, but also specifically through the dialectic, the application of the logos through the dialectic. So whatever we knew beforehand, we're returning back to it with something new, which is the very structure of the dialectic and the structure of a limerick. Line 1, line 2, something new where some change or development happens, some sort of new logos about the subject. So you return back in line 4 to the same rhythm and cadence of the first line, but you've learned something. We said this also applies to jokes, and it also applies to our dreams. Define, number 1, define what you think the dream is. Number 2, demonstrate. What in your life demonstrates that thing you've defined, therefore allowing you what you need to answer. Why am I having this dream now? Why is this problem a problem? How does it demonstrate itself in my present? Okay, that's where you start. That's enough. I mean, you could do more. You could talk about what the specific puzzle is. You could talk about key characters. You can go on to do a whole dialect. You could divide it up into more terms and so on and so on. And you can bring these things together in a synthesis analysis to get an even clearer definition of what you think the dream is about before you start. But 2 is enough. We're simplifying things here. We're getting the essence of it. Sufficient. So what is the definition of the message of the dream? How does it demonstrate in your life? Then you have to go through the third thing, divide the dream up according to the logos and dialectic, as much as you're at, wherever you're at, which is good because you're not just learning about your dream and learning about yourself, you're also practicing the exercise that is the purification and the separation of the soul from the body, the actual exercise of philosophy. It's a win-win-win. And then after you get the key idea, so division to synthesis analysis, from that division stage, there'll be a key idea or understanding that synthesizes the whole thing or is the most fundamental or the most primary. Then you take that back to the start and you'll compare it. How does this new understanding of the dream compare to the beginning? So you see this is a lyric. Lyric, line 1, line 2, these are the same definition, demonstration of the same division. Third is a longer line of limerick, developing logos that you return back to the start in line 4. So, does this help us understand our problem of why learn if we knew it all to begin with? Because that fourth stage, we're coming back with something of the logos and the dialectic in our back pockets. That's a Pierre Grimes expression. You take it with you in your back pocket. You don't throw it in the trash, is another thing he said. So there is a significance. I don't know what it could be, but that's a question I'm throwing out to all of you. And that same question, what is the significance of having to learn it if we knew it already? Specifically, the way of remembering is the logos and dialectic. What's the significance of going through that, particularly when we're getting involved into a period of history where our culture has not yet awoken the dialectic? We're in the counterattack after Socrates, but it's time now to awaken it. We have what we need. We have the logos and dialectic from Socrates. We have its shadow understood very clearly from the work of Dr. Pierre Grimes. And we have dream analysis, which marries the two. We have what we need to solve problems now, but currently we're all at some level of suffering through the implications of what kind of a world exists if we don't have it awakened yet. That's our current world. So why do that? Why born into this point of time only to return with the logos and dialectic in our back pocket? That's the question. It's one of the biggies. Another one of the biggies is, well, hang on a second. Wouldn't that also apply to this question? Having self-ousia here and the mysterious second term to establish this kind of a pattern, to go back to the one self, if everything is from the one self, even self-ousia, of which all of these other terms are aspects, then you could even say, hey, not just learning, but reversion to the self. If we are all self, like that spiritual tradition, kind of an upgrade of the spiritual tradition. If we talked about oneness being the goal of most spiritual traditions, and there's a self and other, or a me and other than me that gets united into that oceanic experience of pure consciousness or mind or the Tao, whatever logos you have, we could upgrade it and say, hang on a second, instead of oneness, let's say beyond that, the self. Why is there a me self and other selves, or self-ousia and whatever this is, if the whole purpose of going through this not yet recognizing the self only to return to the self, even through being, applying the self logos and dialectic to being to the self, why is everything in self emanating from self only to return to self? Same problem, isn't it? If it's all the one self, why then this life? And have we established enough of a pattern in our reflection today to do with us and them in politics and the physical world, to do with self and other in the spiritual world, to do with beauty, from examples of beauty to beauty itself, examples of justice to justice itself, from justice and beauty as two things to self-ousia, reflecting on dreams, having seen it one way and then another way? Have we established enough of a pattern to apply that pattern to this question? That's philosophy. Look for many examples of a pattern, give birth to the highest question that you're at, and see if you can apply it. Have we done that? Have we developed a hypothesis, an if statement, about a possible way of understanding why become many only to return to one, using our understanding of the logos and the dialectic to answer that ultimate question, if oneself, why am I here right now? So let's make another triad, because that was a kick-ass one. What have we got? We've got and to the, or we could say us. Oops. We could say us, them, to unity. We could say inside cave good, outside cave bad, to which is a way of thinking, to the logos. We could say beauty, beautiful, person one, beautiful, person two, is enough to ask the question of beauty itself, or we say self-beauty. That applies to justice, goodness, all of the things we're interested in. Hey, even we said before, equality with sticks. What is equal itself? Equal, greater, and lesser. And also sameness and difference and likeness. These are these ones, the ones that Parmenides uses in his dialectic. So we've got another three. You could say equal, greater, and lesser, beautiful, justice, and goodness, same, different, likeness. So intellectual ideas like same, different, heart and whole. Desirable ideas like goodness, justice, and beauty, and relative ideas like equal, lesser, and greater. So we could have a question or a hypothesis we can carry with us. Is there a triad of self-er terms? Keep that in our back pocket. We might get back to that later. That's a little teaser trick. Yeah. We also said we could have another triad here. The spiritual version of in cave good, bad, in cave good, bad, outside cave bad, which was oneness, which is the essence of Taoism, Hinduism, and most yogas, which is myself and other, to a state of oneness. We also saw that from self-beauty, that also applies with justice. Well, that's two. We keep going and say, oh, thanks for the clap. We could also say justice, goodness, each of those things, which means that's enough. That's two. Which is enough to go from self, running out of space. Let's move this over a little bit. Let's move this up, maybe. Move this up a bit. Okay. Self-beauty. Self-justice. And we call it self-ousia, the hypoxis. We also talked about dream analysis. Talked about move it over a little bit. talked about the problem of the dream, problem in the dream. No, the message, didn't we say? Define the message. What do you think is the message of the dream? Which is what you can ask yourself or ask your friend if you're doing this over coffee. How does it how is it in your life, or the reason why now? Why are you having this dream now? Dream now. Okay. Then you go through the process of dialectic and reflection. Again, it's the same things. Self-reflection, or we call that ousia, through the using the logos that we are learning, and through the structure of the dialectic that we're learning. So, heck, let's make that a triad. It's enough, isn't it? So what are we using? We're using this self logos, using the dialectic in ousia, or self reflection. There's another triad for us. Man, we have filling up our inventory. It's like we slayed a boss today and we're having all this mass loot that we can benefit from. Okay, so we apply that to this stage here. What's the message of the dream? Why are you having this dream now? And then we go through the dialectic, so using the self logos in a period of a process of self-reflection, or ousia. Then we get a new understanding of the dream. Of the dream. And then you might even realize, oh, hang on a second, the difference between this understanding and this might illustrate the actual meaning of the dream itself. And we saw that that applies for our problem. The problem I had going through it was actually a problem in the dream. So you could say, taking that, that down a little bit. You could say, what are our two questions? Where you at? Where you're stuck. While doing the dream. So where you're at is how you understood the dream but when you began. Where you're stuck, any difficulty that you had in doing dream analysis, did you put it off? Would you rather talk about Tom Cruise over coffee with your friend than a dream? Did you think you weren't good enough? I'm not saying do dream analysis perfectly. I'm saying do dream analysis and have a problem doing dream analysis, but write it down. I'm not saying apply the dialectic masterfully to dream analysis. No, just apply it only where you're at. Use your highest, aim for excellence, do whatever you like, push the limits and whatever you can do, but don't go further. Don't do what Pierre does. Do what you do. I mean, you'll get to Pierre as we go. Maybe even beyond. But yeah, have problems doing it. Do it anyway. Do it, even if you're not perfect. Where you're at, where you're stuck. In the dream. Doing dream analysis. Doing dream analysis. Doing dream analysis. And you might notice that will be reflected in the dream itself. In dream. Is that a triad? I'm not sure. Maybe. That's a lot. What have we got here? What have we got here? We've got the essence of the problem of language. Latin versus Greek. Latin doesn't have the. It's also we've got the essence of the difference between modern philosophy and real philosophy. Is it an eclectic series of us that you can use, or is there one? Same thing with psychotherapy. Are there many different therapeutic models, or is there one? Are there many different political parties that are all just as good as each other, or is there one way of understanding how to understand human problems, human needs, and how to manage ideally, justly? We've got the nature of human problems. All human problems, you could say, comes down to the cave thing. Every dream has a goal. Right. Yes. Yes. So you can even make another a pyramid out of that. A triangle out of that. What's your goal in the dream? How did you act towards the goal? Or what was the drama, maybe? What was the drama? Did you reach the goal? And how did you function in that drama? And was it a success or failure? So yeah, I'm not saying that's the triad, but probably goal would be one of them. To our friend in the chat here. So what else do we have here? We have this thing here. What do all politicians that are scammers, religious scammers, YouTube scammers, conservative scammers, right-wing scammers, hey, even left-wing scammers, what do they play on? This. Where does it come from? Oh, by the way, you understand, we have an understanding with this same triad. Where does it come from? Oh, our human evolution. So simple. This is what I was saying at the beginning of today's talk. One of the reasons I love philosophy is it makes things so gosh darn simple. Isn't it simplifying things? What do scammers do? Try and make it complicated. Look at the many examples. Oh, there are many political parties. Surely we can't solve human problems of wealth inequality or homelessness or the cost of living crisis. What? There's nothing we can do. Look at all these many limes I'm carrying. That's a meme, by the way. An old meme, so. Look at all these limes I'm carrying. Oh, I'm so confusing. Every scam does that. You can't read the Bible. Look at all the quotes in the Bible. You can't do philosophy. Look at how many gosh darn books there are for you to read before you can call yourself a philosopher. Bollocks. Hey, just read Phaedo. Just need one. And you're in the game. Be curious about yourself. You're in the game. So long as you are doing self-reflection, you are doing something to learn the self-logos. We have that in any Platonic book. Have your nose in any Platonic book. You're getting the self-logos. Apply it to yourself. So you could say this is the understanding, this is the application. You need both. Just like we need the dianoia and the nous, our understanding and our state of mind. We need to be learning the self-logos from somewhere. We have to be learning this. That's why we're reading the Phaedo. We have to be applying it. That's why we have the board. That's why people are joining the Discord and sharing their own dialectics and their own art, which is the methodological representation of the dialectics. And if you're doing those things and applying it to the nature of the self, your self-mind, self-being, what's your most important self-goals, as we got in the chat, then you're a philosopher. What do gatekeepers say? Oh no, you have to read all these books. We say, baloney. You're in the problem. That's where you're blocked. And how do we represent that historically? In cave good, outside bad. So we see we're not bad because we have this problem. It's just a part of our evolution. Just like we are not bad that we're not enlightened like Socrates. It's a part of our evolution. What else have we got here? Oh, we understand all spiritual traditions other than philosophy. Yogas. Myself and other, I want a state of oneness. That oneness, the Tao, right? There's self and other. We want to have the spirits of oneness. A Buddhist might say, oh, by the way, that doesn't exist. once you have that state of oneness, realize even that is an illusion. All right, you might be like this sort of spiritual tradition that has like Kashmir Sufism. Pierre often talks about how that's that oneness in the gap of the physical world, often referred to state of excellence or being in the zone, because our physical world is like a movie strip. Either way, that's the essence of spiritual traditions. To move from there to there. How do they do it? That's the difference of spiritual traditions. Which means we could apply it again. Hey, can we find screw it, let's do it right now. Just move this over. Oh, here we go. Emanation and reversion via logos and dialectic. That was a note from before. Kind of applies here. Let's keep going. All right. So what do we want to go from? Do we have enough to establish this spiritual thing in our everyday life? Well, let's go for it. We have Buddhism. Seeks a oneness. They call nirvana. We have Taoism, which is curiously spelt with a T. Taoism, but it's Taoism. Buddhism, Taoism. We could also say Hinduism, Taoism, or Kashmir Sufism, or many, many, many. But we have two, that's enough. In the chat, are you talking about a dream you had? So what are we doing in your dream? Yeah, interesting. So worth reflecting on. Record your dreams as soon as you can to get them most accurate and worth reflecting on. So Buddhism, well, that's not how you spell Buddhism, that's how you spell Buddhish. Ha! I do a bit of Buddhism. You could say I'm Buddhish. Buddhish. Okay, that was a dumb joke. Buddhism. So we've got enough to establish a pattern in spirituality. So wherever we go with this, we have to, okay, so what we've got a bunch of different triads that reflect the same pattern, which means we have a manyness. We have enough for this. Our triads can become the new manyness. We have triangle 1, and then the 1, triangle 2. It's enough. So somehow there's a reason why we can go from the many triangles to this single, the triangle. This is an implication that's following from our reflection. If there are many examples of this triangle that are the most important ways of understanding everything, which is again, philosophy makes things so gosh darn simple. There must be if there is a pattern, a hyparxis triangle, a single triangle of which there are all many. Okay, so let's keep that question in our question sack, in our inventory. What the heck is that? But let's keep going with these triangles. Right, we've got so the nature of scammers or division in the world, us versus them. You know, Republicans, Democrats, immigrants, nationalists, Germany, the rest of the world, and so on. But we want unity. We want to realize we're all human beings in some way. We have to find something that unifies us. What do we have that's common? Well, let's do it. In all of these, what has been the method for going from the us to thus? From us to thus in philosophy, the self, logos, and dialectic. What does the Latin tradition lack? The self, logos, and dialectic. What do we see the vices that were the shadows of the virtues lack? Self, logos, and dialectic applied to being. Modern philosophy versus real philosophy. So if our world is divided as us versus them, and we can say that comes from in cave good, outside bad, what is it that will bring us to unity? How are we all the same? Well, to find that, we have to apply the self, logos, and the dialectic. What do we have that's the same? Well, we are the same soul, and we are all of the nature of the soul. We all have the question to become a philosopher or lover of the body. We can all develop the true virtues if we're a philosopher, or the vices causing our problems. We all are climbing the ladder. We can always say, for all of us, everyone's going to be where they're at, where they're stuck. So how are we unifying ourselves? In philosophy. The self, logos, and dialectic. Okay? Apply that to evolution. Where do we start evolutionarily? Inside good cave, outside cave bad. Kept us away from saber-toothed tigers. But now that we have the logos, what's a new way of understanding the world? The logos. That's that line in the ladder we talked about. The ladder of human development. There's a certain line, and then at this stage, we can learn the logos, which is why we have this channel, Awakening Philosophy, Awakening the Logos and Dialectic. It's a different way of thinking, other than people who look the same as me good, people who are different bad. In Australia, we just had the State of Origin, which is the biggest rugby league game. And that's marketed in this way. Your state good, other state bad. But 5 minutes in, somebody acted fundamentally unjust that ruined the excellence of the game, and suddenly nobody cared about this anymore. No one cared about the biggest football game of the year. No one cared because one person from one team acted in a terribly unjust way towards another. It doesn't matter what side you were on, everyone is the same in that we all want justice. So suddenly everyone was united by recognizing, this us versus them way of marketing football is boomer talk, or old-fashioned talk is bullshit now. We have to, and even the old players were saying, we play because we want excellence. We want this player to play. This player who was knocked out in a high tackle, concussed, had to be removed from the game, probably will suffer long-term brain damage. We want him. We all like him because he's excellent. He plays with excellence. And we don't like that there was an injustice. So we don't care about this, my team versus your team. We are interested in justice. What's justice? That's something that we understand through the logos and can directly experience through the logos. That's philosophy. So we are at a level of, it's not about that anymore, it's about this. In fact, booing your other team instead of celebrating excellence. We don't like that anymore. The fans that act that way, everyone's getting turned off now. We're at that stage. Okay, what else do we have? What is this logos that we're learning? You start with beautiful things, you start with us, and then you go to the us. Applies to beauty. We said it also applies to justice. That gives us 2, enough to go to self-ousia. How do we go to self-ousia? Well, Socrates used the logos and the dialectic through question and answers to bring us to see that there is a self-ousia, which is the hyparxis of beauty, justice, and all the ideas, just as there is a hyparxis of soul. So we better throw in soul, because that's something that was in the text we just read. So do we have enough to see that there are 2 souls? Yes. We have my soul. We have Socrates' soul. And then we have the soul. The hyparxis of soul. Which makes sense because if there is all of the things that we individually learn are from the same self-ousia, and we knew it because we were it, then we all would have been at some stage the same thing, meaning we would have been the same soul in self-ousia. So we're all the same soul, necessary for the theory of learning that we've been reading in the text. So what are we seeing? We've got enough manyness to establish a pattern. And that pattern is establish enough for a pattern, and then applying the self, logos, and dialectic to get to the top. So hey, to have a physical manyness, you have what you need for a problem. You have the problem in modern culture, the Latin, the Third Reich. Which is interesting. The church allowed the Latin tradition, bestowed the Latin tradition to the Nazis in the Third Reich. Recently, the American Republicans say they want to take up that tradition and take on the authority. The Latin tradition. We have enough for a problem, but we also have what we need to solve problems, which is the Greek tradition. Because it has the word the that is missing from our language in the Latin tradition. Talked about evolutionary speaking. Yeah, we had what we need in the physical world based on our evolution to cause problems. But we also have now, in awakening philosophy, what we need to solve problems. What is it? The logos, self-logos and dialectic. We have what we need in our physical senses to recognize two beautiful people or two equal sticks. But we also have what we need in the self, logos, and dialectic to go through that conversation we have just gone through in the Phaedo, to go from equal sticks to equal itself, beautiful people to beauty itself. So have you seen the pattern? Being physical in time and space in our human form gives us what we need for a problem, for a injustice, for a but also questions. We can look at all human problems as puzzles and questions. Wow.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Being in the physical world gives us what we need for... Clap. Clap too. For being in the physical world gives us what we need for injustices, problems, and questions. Can we unify those and say, hey, by the way, if we recognize that we have that, hey, problems are not personal, it's not because we suck or the people different than us suck. It's part of our evolution. It's part of our learning. It's why we're here. But it's not a tragedy because through philosophy, we have what we need to go from the problems to the understanding, to go from the historical bloodsheds and wars and injustices and ignorance and gatekeeping of philosophy to actual understanding and growth. We have what we need to go from, hey, even nice things. It's nice to see a beautiful person. It's even nicer to see two beautiful people. But it might awaken a love where you want to connect with them. And there might be a physical limit with how closely you can connect with them and for how long. And then when they leave, you might get sad, the ups and downs of the human experience. Therefore, in the human world, which has the ups and downs, you might have not only nice things, but a problem. You can only smush your bodies together for so long, and you can't connect completely with your beloved. And if there's two beautiful people, that's going to make it even harder. But in self-beauty, you become the self-ousia through the hyparxis of the self-soul. That's what we're reading in the Phaedo. What's that? A complete union. The things that you desire in the physical world gives you a problem. And last time we finished with the question, one of the problems with the ups and downs, the extreme pleasures at the top and the extreme pains on the bottom, is you think that's therefore real. You don't go beyond the bottom of the pyramid. If you think that's the most real, then what about self-beauty, which is actually real? Eternal, immortal, pure, all of those adjectives we have in our dialectic that we've been building. So yeah, maybe that's a kind of a question to our puzzle of last podcast. Could that be? Maybe. Not sure. Let's keep going. Let's see if it's a universal pattern. If it is, then it would show our hypothesis that being in the physical, what are we learning? What's our hypothesis? Being in the physical world gives us good and bad things, ups and downs in relative experience, happy and sad, but being in the physical world gives us what we need for our problems, which itself gives us what we need to develop a question, which gives us what we need to discover the self-logos and the dialectic, which gives us what we need to return home and solve problems and remove the injustices in history and get over mass cons and bullshit causes of wars and reach our spiritual goals. If it's all the same process from the many to the one, and reach self-ousia and self-reflect and understand the messages of our dreams and understand the message of our dreams and understand dreams itself, that the dreams reflect where we're stuck and where we're at. That's our hypothesis. Being alive in this period of history gives us what we need for both problems, and if we turn those problems into questions and apply the self-logos and dialectic to those questions, it gives us what we need to solve our problems. What do we call that in the Phaedo? Purification from our problems and perfection in the logos, escaping our fate and reaching our destiny. Too much pretty. It's a problem. Right, yeah, and too much pretty. The pleasures can keep you stuck here if you think that's the most real. You'll just be chasing beautiful things. So, okay, let's keep going. What have we seen? Well, we saw that we could apply this to the spiritual question of you're a self, you're another, but people interested in spirituality want that experience of oneness. Let's apply it. Can we find two examples of spirituality? Yes, Buddhism and Taoism. Do we have enough for a problem? Are there problems from having different spiritual traditions? Can they fight each other? Can they be mad at each other? Can it cause political conflict? If you go to a Buddhist, if you've ever tried this, and I have, can you ever go to one group with an understanding you've gained from the other? What do? In my experience, they are freaking hostile. Oh no, we don't bring in anything from outside our tradition. No, we don't want to mix it up with other things, and we want to keep our tradition pure. In all my experiences, if you come in saying, hey, Buddhism, I learned something from Taoism that would really help your group, they have been aggressively hostile to it. Interesting. One of many problems, and we also had that problem that we've been talking about, a Buddhist and a Taoist cross each other in a path and they don't recognize each other. Why? Well, if we have the self-logos and dialectic applied as a ladder of development, we might recognize the Buddhist here and the Taoist here. If they haven't learned the ladder, they might not recognize somebody at a higher stage or at a lower stage because they just jump to whatever level they're in. Is that a problem? Wouldn't a true guru be able to recognize anyone where they're at? Be it Buddhist, Taoist, Hindu, whatever? And then couldn't they offer something to them to help them? What's that called? What has Socrates been offering Sibius and Cebes all the way through? Dialectic. So yes, in answer to our question, having different spiritual traditions like Buddhism, Taoism, and many, many others, but two is enough to establish a pattern. Can it cause problems? Yes. We just listed a whole bunch. And using the theory that we have developed, what do we have to go from the many to the one and solve those problems? What brings us from our interpretation of our dream before dream analysis to the true understanding of the dream? Self, logos, and dialectic. You ask, you mad Buddhist? Right. Well, you could troll them, but we don't want to just troll them. We want to help them. And help ourselves in the process, because it's all the same thing. Same self, according to these triangles. Okay, what moves us from reflecting on our own selves to the nature of the dream itself? What gives us what we need to understand about the dream itself? What takes us from the examples of the different ideas to this single self-idea? What takes us from the examples of beauty to the self-beauty? What takes us from the way of thinking good versus bad, inside cave good, outside cave bad, to actual reasoning? What brings us from modern philosophy or Latin tradition to true philosophy or perennial philosophy or Greek tradition? It's the self, logos, and dialectic, baby. This is what I've been saying all day today. It makes things so gosh darn simple. So simple. And what's the nature of cons? What's the definition of simple? This. Simple is the unify. Simple is the hypoxis. Bringing it all together into a single pattern, the triangle. What do con artists do? What do economists and bankers and financial bros do to gatekeep so they can exploit and screw over everyone? They make it complicated. Oh, you wouldn't understand the market. You wouldn't understand inflation. Bullcrap. It's simple as heck. You make it complicated to gatekeep it so people don't rise up and realize they're being scammed. Same thing. The Red Pill podcast and Republican scammers and that whole ecosystem on YouTube of us versus them, guys good, women's bads, Republicans goods, Democrats bads, Hollywood bad, but our, I don't know, right-wing network good. Making it divided, making it complicated. Oh, by the way, wouldn't it be good to help everybody? Isn't that simple? Oh, no, it's more complicated than that. Because of freedoms and because of, you wouldn't understand the Constitution. Famously, Bill Burr, recently, if you are not a fan of Bill Burr or you don't care about pop culture, then ignore this part. But famously, Bill Burr went on a very typical right-wing, old, grizzled, ex-comedian podcast, Bill Maher. And he's famous for this. Bill Burr said, hey, it's simple. We could just help people. And he said, no, you don't understand politics. You're an idiot. Bill Burr is really funny. Yeah, Bill Burr's great. And Bill Maher is the opposite of Bill Burr. It's very funny to see him say, oh, Bill, you wouldn't understand. Your simple answers to solve these problems, I can ignore. Why? Because you wouldn't understand. It's very complicated, you see. He literally said those words. It was very condescending and egotistical and very funny to see Bill Burr go, what the hell are you talking about? He was such an ass. But we're understanding what he's doing. It's muddying the waters. It's gatekeeping. It's staying at the particulars. It's being at this bottom end. And everyone who doesn't like that, what do they yearn for? They yearn for unity. Let's unite the world. Let's find a commonness. We're all the self. Hey, if you want a religion, make it the self. Because that doesn't require belief. You don't have to believe in a self. You are the self. To get to the self, you develop self, logos, and dialect. So it's great. You want a way of unifying yourselves? It's the self. You want a way of going from to the? It's the self. You want a way of going from inside good, outside cave bad? It's the self. Myself and other, it's all the oneness, the experience of the one self. So we're seeing, self-beauty and self-justice. What does it go to? Self, usia. Beautiful person too, self-beauty. So we're seeing the goal that unifies everything that we're seeking is the self. and the way is the self, logos, and dialectic. So let's apply it to solving the problem of spirituality. Is there a problem of manyness in spiritual traditions? Of course there are. We listed a whole bunch. So using our hypothesis, what would that mean? We'd have to apply the self, logos, and dialectic to reach something of the self version. What's the self version of spirituality? Is there a spiritual tradition that A, utilizes the self, logos, and dialectic and has the self version of spirituality as its ultimate goal? Let's think. Oh, hang on a second, that's philosophy. You could, that's a pretty apt, succinct, sufficient, beautiful, and necessary definition for philosophy. So what is the spiritual tradition that is the hyparxis and unification and solving of spiritual problems? According to the logos that we're discovering, this isn't my theory. Every stage I had to posit a theory. I had to discover a pattern to bring forward a question. I had to find examples. Look at all the pyramids that we have here. I had to find examples from many different things. Examples from the dreams, from our conversation and chat about dreams, from what we're doing in philosophy, from what we just did in the Phaedo, for the our interest in spirit, and my interest in spirituality, our shared interest in spirituality, our interest in purifying ourselves from problems and applying it to the world, so the world doesn't blow ourselves up and we can stop hurting people. Like, just come on, man. we can stop now. We have what we need. Understanding the historical roots of that and the evolutionary roots of that. So we had what we need to develop a series of A's, but also, what did we look for? The same thing we've been learning is the role of the philosopher. We were curious. We seeked excellence. We looked for our highest goals. We wanted to solve the world's problems. We wanted to understand spirituality. So we seeked excellence in what we did. We looked for the key terms, specifically selfer terms like self-beauty and self-ousia and stuff like that. We looked for patterns so we could find the pyramids. We developed a question from those patterns. You have enough for a pattern, you have enough to give a question. You have a pattern, you have enough to... Same thing with dream analysis. You look for a pattern. Is there a pattern in the dream of the same problem, or in the dream and your life? The dream and your personal life is enough to establish a pattern. A pattern is enough to establish a problem and also a question. So problems go to questions in the game of philosophy, and questions go to answers or solutions with the application of the logos and dialectic. That's what we are discovering today. Be it dreams, be it anything. So, we're learning more about what it means to be a philosopher.
Sneaky little hobbitses.
That makes... Okay, no, that was wrong sound drop. Well, let me try that again. We're learning what we have to be a philosopher.
You're a wizard, Harry.
There we go. And that we're all on the same quest.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
So, seek excellence, number one. Look for these key terms, specifically selfer terms too. Have enough for a pattern and order. Patterns are enough in the physical world to establish problems, but also in philosophy, we go from problems to questions based on those patterns. Is there a question that you can build from this pattern? Now, that gives us what we need to apply our key terms to our question. And also, what are we always doing? Self-ousia, reflecting on ourselves with the key terms. We can develop a hypothesis. That goes into our hypothesis stack. We apply the dialectic as well to make an even better hypothesis. We represent our dialectic and hypothesis in our little stories that we tell each other. Metaphors, our art, mythology. And the way of doing that is to establish those patterns is look for our skill trees. What triad skill trees have we developed? What 4s and 2s? That all come in. And then we finally sew it all together with the sewing needle of infinite truths, the greatest weapon you can get in the game. And that's what we've been doing. So we're learning more about what we've been developing as we go in learning the philosophy. We're learning what it means to be a philosopher. Today, we just brought it all together to have fantastic example of all of those pieces coming together into a unity, which is cool. But also, it shows us what we need to understand the cause of problem in the most simple way. Being physical is enough for a many, which is enough to establish a pattern, which is enough to establish a problem. That is the tragic nature of humanity. We are constantly, in our own personal lives, in our families, groups, and communities, and in humanity as a species, repeating the tragic problems, our fate, over and over again. The pages of history are soaked in blood, caused by the same gosh darn problems we've been repeating. Being in the physical world is enough to establish a manyness, which is enough to establish a problem. That's tragedy. Now, how do we move from tragedy, where the tragic hero of the play plays out the tragic consequence of his problems, to philosophy? Well, we're learning this. Look for a self version of the thing and use the self logos and dialectic. That's our way of solving problems. So being in the physical world is enough for problems, which makes sense of why the old English versions and the old translations talk about experience and suffering with the same term. Experience gives you, and we're seeing in the ups and downs of pleasures and pains as part of being a human being in a physical world. Ups and downs, patterns, but also problems, and also tragedies, until we become philosophers, till we what? Awaken philosophy. What does that do? Gives us the method and the goal to solve problems. So we're no longer in a tragedy play. All problems, look at them all. Whether we're talking about evolutionarily, historically, spiritually, philosophically in the highest sense, philosophically in the sort of lower sense, moving to self-beauty. Well, I mean, they're not lower and higher, but both sort of levels, spirituality, whether we're talking about collectively, whether we're talking about understanding our dreams, whether we're talking about understanding the nature of dreams itself. It's this game. Self-logos and the dialectic in self-reflection, and we can also say self-reflection applied to self. Oh yeah, it's kind of in the name. Okay. So what we discovered about the goal, notice this is things we're discovering as we go. That's why philosophy is cool. And we will continue. We will see more about this as we go, because Socrates has been saying in the Phaedo, we have to repeat this doctrine. We have to keep practicing. We have to do this every day, all the time. Anything else will probably be an example of a block. Because what else is better than this? What else is going to have a lasting, what else can both A, recognize problems, and B, solve problems? Nothing. If we seek the good in everything we do, what actually brings you to the self version of the good? This. So whether you're seeking something, you should be seeking this. Whether you want to do something honorable, it should be this. Whether you want a kind of learning that goes beyond your lifetime, it should be this. Whether you want to understand how to understand the dreams, your messages, personal messages to you in your dreams, it's this. Save humanity, it's this. Share what can be beneficial to yourself and your friends and the world, is this. And that's why we're in the book. That's why we have this page and we're doing our own dialectics. And that's why we look at our dreams. That's why we seek excellence in whatever we do. So, yeah, also the soul, of course. My soul, Socrates' soul, the soul. Right, you start with passive absorption, but you want to do it. Apply it. Make your own. Have your own workbooks. Create your own fan fiction. Hey, you're having fun playing a video game. What can you see of the logos in it? You might start watching movies and you recognize, oh, hang on a second. These characters have problems. I'm recognizing the cause of the problems. Oh, these characters in the film are going towards solving the problem. They're at a certain level of the dialectic. in the logos. But they reach a certain level where the movie kind of tanks. Because they haven't awoken the self-logos and dialectic applied to the self-reflection, to usia, self-usia. So you might start getting bored with certain films based on where the filmmaker is at and where he's stuck. Another way of saying that, where he's at in his level of development. Right, say it enough, it becomes... Yes, that's what you mean. I get you. So yeah, keep repeating it. Say it enough. That's what you mean by passive absorption. Say it enough, it becomes second nature. Absolutely. Which is what learning is. Becomes your nature, but not the nature you're born with. And we're seeing we're born necessarily being human, we're born with problems, and we're seeing why. But also, we're saying we need problems to give birth to a question, to motivate us to reflect on that question, to learn the self-logo, so that when we do return back to the self, the ultimate version of this, we master the self-logos and dialectic, we go to the self, we revert back beyond even self-usia, the oneness that most spiritual traditions are in. Yes, why learns, or what? Yes, good question, or what learns? To the self version of even spirituality, somehow when we return to the one self in that encounter or recognition or remembering, we'll have the self-logos in our back pocket, and maybe in that encounter, we will have some clue as to why go through this. Why leave this philosophy, the self version? Why leave the one self only to return through the self-logos and dialectic? What's the significance of that? Whether we're learning about justice, beauty, or all of the ideas, being, truth, self-usia, whether we're experiencing the oneness and realizing that our soul is immortal because it's that oneness is also the self-soul, or the one soul, or the soul. And then we give up our fear of death in that spiritual experience because we know that we are eternal. Whether we're understanding our dreams, whatever it is, what's the point? Why do it? Why leave knowing only to return through self-logos and dialectic? Why leave the self only to return through self-logos and dialectic? And also we have a hypothesis. Again, it's a pretty damn good one of not only how to solve all problems, but how to understand the greatest one, spirituality. Therefore, we could say, what is philosophy? It's the hypothesis of spirituality. It's that which Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, and whatever ism you started with will lead to. It's the archetype of spirituality. And it's our fundamental birthright. It's part of the universe. It's not something we invent, we discover. It's not personal, that you happen to start with, oh, but I thought this was the most beautiful person. I'm mad that you're saying that there is the beauty itself. You wouldn't be mad. You'd be like curious, really? There's the beauty. You wouldn't get attached. Then don't get attached to my cave good, outside cave bad. Don't get attached to, well, I grew up in Buddhism. I'm going to stay there. I'm not going to develop to philosophy because my cave good, outside cave bad. Don't stay in ignorance. Change your mind. That's what it means to be a good person, to be able to change your mind. Now we have the question that we've been playing with for the last few weeks. What should change our mind? And hang on a second, that seems to be this as well. But this seems to be what should change our mind. Yes, strength gains all day. See it in everything. And that's what we're seeing. When you can see it in everything, it becomes so gosh darn simple. So simple. And even the cause of problems is so simple because the cause of problems is making it complicated when it's not. But anyway, we start by making it complicated. We start by looking for the examples. We start by looking for the manyness so that we can give birth to a question, so that we can apply the dialectic and the self-logos to it and find the hyparxis or the self-version. That's the game. So on that note, this is where we are in the text. So we were just reviewing, but I think that's a nice time to end it. There's a lot of interesting insights and reflection. Again, we don't just read the text. Sometimes we have reviews of the text, repetition, and sometimes we apply it, which gives us an ability to reflect upon it, apply it to what's most meaningful. And that's what we did today. So that was a fun podcast. Thank you for joining me. I hope to see you next time. And thank you for joining me in the chat. Again, we have a Discord, and you can please like and subscribe. Recommend to your friends if you think they might be interested in it. And you can find links to the text as well. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time.